everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Araceli, aka Chelly, and today on Chelly's Mental Wealth, we're gonna have Dr. Cristine as a guest. And the reason why we wanted to get together is because we had this really serious conversation about colonization and decolonization, and to me, it was interesting to me to hear these words because I understood the concept of it, but you know, the growth of these words was like interesting to me. I was just curious to see, and when we started having these conversations, I told her like, oh my gosh, we need to make a video so that we can educate people and teach them about why it's important to know about colonization and decolonization and what she went through in regards to being exposed to colonization. You want to explain to the audience as to like what your occupation is, what you do, so they can understand like what your background is?
So I'm Dr. Cristine and I work with children and families for the most part. That's my specialty. I'm currently based in Monrovia and Burbank.
So I guess for me, my biggest thing when I did communicate with her is I asked her, I was like, so what does colonization really mean specifically? So can you explain to us like what colonization means?
That's a really big question in general because colonization to me is so historical and it feels like it's just like generations and generations of Europeans coming to America and saying they discovered it and it actually having had Native Americans for who knows how long, right? So I think of colonization and decolonization more as it affects me in more nuanced ways. So for example, the fact that growing up we learn so much about all of the people that have impacted our history.
Yeah, that's true.
That are white, but we don't necessarily learn the history. I'm from Guatemala. I don't necessarily know a ton of Guatemalan history. And if I were to try to look for that information, I'm not sure I would find what I was necessarily looking for, you know? So I think about that and I think about how that's impacted my mind. And so when I think about decolonization, I think about decolonizing my mind in general.
Yes, she's absolutely right. And I know that when I talked to her outside of filming, I explained to her at least my experience with colonization prior to me knowing that word even existed. For me, my process was, of course, like, yes, learning all the stuff that I learned in high school. And then when I went to college in a sense and I was taking my associate's degree is when I was fortunate enough to have teachers that taught me about the inconsistency, I guess you could say, not really being truthful about our history and how we were taught in the history books. And then so this person just educated me like so much where it just blew my mind. I was like, oh my goodness, so the system doesn't really work for us and we need to like work harder. And you know, I found this, I think when I was like 20, 21, 22 years old. So I'm telling you, when I started hearing these buzzwords like colonization, decolonization, I was like, what does this mean? And then when I started to get to learn more about it, I was like, oh, so it's basically what I learned, you know, 10 years ago, but now there's a word for it. So that to me, it's like evolution. like that to me shows that the word is spreading. Like it took 10 years, but now more and more people are knowing versus I think, I don't know, I feel like I consider myself as a minority. I don't know if you consider yourself as a minority.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I consider myself as a minority. So I don't know, I think like once we go to college is where I think we open our eyes more. Where we're like, what is this? So going into that, I mean, when you went to college, I know that you told me that to you was kind of like
yeah, well,
describe your college experience.
Yeah, college for me was more diverse. I went to a university in Riverside and that was an okay experience. But then when I went to graduate school, it was really a culture shock to see. And when I got into that orientation room with all of my graduate school cohort, there were 5 minorities and everyone was white, and not just white, like blonde and like blue-eyed white, you know, like they were very white to me. And it was really, I want to say at first it was really shocking and kind of uncomfortable for me. And then when I started to look into the stats, like, I don't know what it is now, but at that time it was like 1% of the population has their doctorate, and then 5% or 3% of that is Latino. So it was like, well, yeah, those numbers make sense. Like in the room that I'm looking at, that makes sense. So then we started to go into our cultural diversity classes together.
Oh, that's interesting.
And we started to talk about white privilege and what that meant for us and what that meant for our clients. And I think for me, it was like a lot of the people that I was in school with had never heard that word and they didn't realize that like white privilege was a thing. you know, and I think as a minority and as a person who has immigrant parents and who feels like culture has been in my face since I was born.
Yes.
So yeah, so it feels like, how do you not know? How do you not know about this?
Yes, it's kind of shocking.
Yeah, and so to me, like, that experience was very unnerving, and then I started to feel like more of the depth of colonization in general, and like how our world is created for white Americans, and how I have to work twice as hard and be twice as good at anything that I do to hold like the same type of position or the same level of respect. And that goes all like so throughout my experience, it was like a full journey, and being able to stomach like some of those conversations with white people that I then considered friends, you know, like we became friends, and having conversations like, well, what you just said is really racist, so what do we do about that, you know? Or like having
those uncomfortable conversations in a very respectful, validating manner.
Yeah. It was really hard, and I think it was hard for all of us. I don't want to say like their experience wasn't hard, because I also think it was hard, and it's like irritating to have to validate that sometimes. It's like facts, right?
It's like you knew. Why did you know?
But I want to also empathize with that, because I think that's where we can come to a place of healing. And even though it's hard for me to like come into that space, I also feel like that's how I started to understand how much work there is left to be done.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, I completely agree. And that kind of goes into like what we're speaking of in regards to colonization and decolonization. So basically what she described was decolonization. So her purpose of being in the school setting when she was in grad school, she realized that there was like these things that was going on. So as students, they try their hardest to decolonize the school setting, right? So can you kind of explain to me what that process was when you tried to decolonize? And first, can you kind of just explain what decolonization means so that the audience understands like more?
I think that's a really big question, and I feel like it's nearly impossible to decolonize an institution, because like the history of America is what it is, and so it's gonna take a lot more legislation and progress to be able to get to places like that. But I think for us individuals who were in that graduate program, we had to really fight for our own communities that we were servicing. So I want to say that the university really benefited from Spanish speakers. So that's a really easy example. Like they really benefited from us, and they really wanted us to further develop our clinical skills in Spanish, but they didn't have any training for that. Right? So we were paying to go to a university. We were paying a lot of money to go to a graduate program.
I know the school, and it's a lot of
it's a lot of money.
It's a private school. It's basically a private school. Yeah, it's one of the private schools.
And so we were paying a lot, and really they were benefiting so much from us. Yeah. And we were having to teach a lot. Right?
Yeah,
so
that's true.
And that just ends up happening, like wherever we go, like wherever I go as a clinician, like I'm seen as like the cultural expert. Why?
That's I'm brown, true. That's true. I mean, and I know what she's feeling, because even in my position, and it's not even forcefully, but I find myself having to explain the culture, having to really explain the dynamics so that the professional doesn't feel or doesn't understand the barriers, really, like where they can really find the answer, but they're looking in a different way. And I try to educate about the cultural barriers and different ways of maneuvering, and why this occurs and why this occurs in private dynamics. And it does, it's kind of like you're wearing a different hat, you're wearing another, a position like that needs to exist. Or that's why, or change the school system, decolonize it so we don't do double work. That's what we're doing, we're doing double work.
So I would say that I was just successful in being able to identify the moments where I feel like I need to decolonize my mind. I wouldn't say I was successful in decolonizing even my cohort or my system or anything like on a larger scale, because I think that requires so much internal work, and I think I was just discovering that piece of it at that time. So in that university, we started things like we started a clinical Spanish class that the students started themselves. So we got a higher level student like a recently graduated student to teach us that course. Wow. And then it was a real course in school, and the school also like allowed us to do that, which was like, you want to give them credit for that. It's like hard for me, but
because I mean, who knows, that's a barrier that you might encounter. Let's say if you're in a grad school and you want to try the same approach that Cristine did, and there might be some hesitation. There might say like, no, why do you need to do that? We're fine. And you just kind of have to, I would encourage you to go talk to a therapist if that happens, or talk to
Yeah.
someone, because that is hard. It's you're dealing with rejection, and they're pretty much rejecting our culture. Like, I can't even imagine. I mean, I can, and that's why I would encourage someone to go talk to someone
It's
if
hard.
you really try, and you know that it's going to benefit people in the future, and they're not allowing you. I mean, who knows? Maybe one thing that I have recommended in the past when people ask me about college is, I say, if it makes you unhappy, if you really are unhappy and you're just forcing yourself, why? Just quit. Or take a break and go back, or find a different school where you feel like, this is where I know that I can be mentally strong and do what I need to do and get what I need to get in order for me to be successful the way I could be. Or, you can work your way through that whole system. It really just depends on the person.
Yeah.
It really does, because some people are really strong. They're like, you know what? Okay, I'm gonna just do what I can, even though they're not letting me. And some people are pretty persistent and very, forthcoming to just not giving up. You might be that person, but just be mindful that you might get that resistance where they're like, no, you're not gonna do this here. And so I'm happy that they at least were open to doing that there. Yeah. And I from my experience, I mean, looking into grad schools, I remember going into a similar grad school where it was a lot of Caucasians, and I remember feeling out of place, and right away I got the imposter syndrome. I was like, oh yeah, they're not gonna get me here. I was like, no. And then I even looked at my skin. I was like, well, I blend in. I was like, they might get me because I blend in. But right away, it killed my self-esteem. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I was already insecure going into the interview. And even afterwards, I felt like I didn't get it. And obviously I didn't get it. But I felt that it was like a blessing in disguise. Who knows? I probably would have encountered the same barriers. But luckily, hopefully, those situations probably would have already been set into place. Who knows? But the thing is that, like, I think the most important thing that we need to understand is decolonization is everywhere, and not just in school settings, right? I think one of the things that I try to do with decolonization is basically decolonization, like, within school settings, like, too. Like, you see that a lot in school settings where people don't really understand the culture, or they don't get interpreters when they should. It makes it harder.
Oh my gosh, yes.
It makes it way hard when they do the interpreters. That's the thing I realized with language barriers. We've encountered a lot of language barriers. Why where services or just progress stays stagnant because the language is it's not there, and parents or caregivers or just people that are receiving services don't really understand what's being translated, and there's this middleman, and then you don't feel comfortable sharing to this middleman, and then it's this weird dynamic that I think we still need a lot of work to be done. And I know that we're still kind of lacking a lot of professionals in the mental health space. So
and even just to speak to that point, the language point, as you grow into your profession and you become an expert in what you're doing, right? Like, you have been working in the community for a long time, but then you go into, let's say you go to an IP with a parent or something, and then the school is like, oh, we don't have an interpreter here. Can you interpret for us, right?
That's happened to me. That's happened. That's happened to me.
Everywhere. And it's like, no, I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm not an interpreter. So I think you'll have to provide that for my client. That's just what it ends up being, because that's not our role. Our role is not to service everyone around us constantly because of the language we speak and the color that we are. I'm there to do my profession and to do my job. And if you misinterpret something, believe me, my client will know that, But I'm not here to service your institution at this time. I'm here to service my client. So I just think that piece is important, and it's it's a role that we easily fall into because we are a collectivistic community. We're always wanting to help, and so it also it feels bad to say no to some of that, but also I think it's important when I go into settings for them to see me as a clinical psychologist and not a different role or whatever they're wanting me to fill in that moment.
Yeah, I agree with you, because it's interesting, because I don't know if everybody remembers when the school system did a complete change with the language, and it's kind of ironic. I was part of that whole ELD program where I was being taught through the school system in Americanized, but in Spanish form, Spanish language. And then I think in 2nd or 3rd grade is where they decided, no more Spanish. It's all English speaking classes. We're not doing dual classes anymore. So then I was put into that class where I had to unlearn everything I was taught for probably 8 years probably, or 9. And then it was stressful. And then look at now it's
all about dual learning.
It's okay, you speak Spanish, but you were trying to strip away my Spanish. Do you imagine because I learned Spanish for that many years is because I feel comfortable enough to speak Spanish sometimes with my videos. And even though I might say some words incorrectly and I might sound and I pronounce them wrong, I have enough confidence because I was able to speak Spanish for that long. But who's to say if there was somebody else who didn't even have the opportunity and now they're Latino and they can't even speak Spanish. And I know that sucks. I've encountered people that like they feel like they're not
ashamed of it.
They're ashamed, you know, and so I'm happy. I guess for me it's kind of like a bittersweet that I'm in the position that I am because it made me relearn my Spanish and relearn how to say certain words because some of the words obviously kind of went away. And you know, even though they might ask me to interpret, like I kind of take it to the point of, well, this is my time to practice my Spanish because fortunately enough, sometimes even if you ask for a interpreter, sometimes they don't have it. But I think it's important that you do exactly what Cristine had just said and be assertive and know your boundaries as a professional or even as a person and say, well, you know what, I do know how, but like challenge. That's you decolonizing a school setting. Like, well, no, this is a school setting
and it should be provided.
You should be provided. And so you know your options. And also too, even when you are being forced to like speak in Spanish, just keep in mind like maybe you can think about my perspective, be like, oh, screw it, fine, if I have to, I have to. There's no options. They said no, then I'm helping, you know, so that you don't internalize it because it is hard sometimes. It's hard. Sometimes you feel like you're getting used in ways where it's just like I said, like you should provide this. Like, why am I working harder when I'm not really focusing? Now I'm just focusing and making sure that I'm translating, but I'm not really capturing what they're saying where it's going to benefit for me to provide the services to my client. So it's this little weird thingy and it's hard. And one thing that I know that I've heard a couple of times, and I've heard his name is Kevin, he's an influencer, and I've seen how he said something in his stories. He said about he wishes that the school system would hire more people of our generation to be in the school systems that know what's going on and they're not behind the times because they're old. There's just like old people just still being there as grad teachers, and it's just like that contributes to the non-decolonization. Like it colonizes the situation because they're still repeating and saying the same old stuff that's not irrelevant anymore.
And that actually is interesting that you say that because that also affects even just diversity in general, right? So it's like a limitation on accepting diversity, and that also affects our kids with special needs. So I'm always thinking about that as well, because the older generations of teachers that I've worked with have a really strict view of how autism should be approached in general. And so it's so interesting that like that kind of goes hand in hand. Like we're trying to come into this more accepting realm and like this neurodiversity and diversity in general and cultural competence. And a lot of that is missing from the older generation. So I like completely understand that because when I see a millennial teacher, I'm just like, oh thank God.
Yes, and that's what I'm saying.
About this.
I was fortunate enough because I know I say this a lot. Like I got my associates with Everest colleges, but I'm so fortunate enough with the teachers that I got there because they were a part of that generation. They taught me all of that stuff, and I didn't feel like it was colonized. It felt like even though some of them were Caucasian and some of them were Mexican, I felt like they knew the ins and outs. Like they were very, very transparent. Like it was like they were honest about everything, about the police system, because obviously that was me trying to be a going into criminal justice. So they were very, very blunt about how the system worked in all aspects. So it was like kind of like a blessing. Like I said, blessing in disguise. Like yes, that degree is not an accredited degree, but all the information that I got is what sparked me to look into the organic stuff. Before now, everything's organic. Looking into the GMOs, looking into the law, how the system doesn't work for our kids, and they have better laws for animals, which I hate. Like I just like that. I hate it. I love animals. Like don't get me wrong, you guys know I love dogs, but the fact that there's more laws that protect dogs and cats. I mean, just dogs and cats specifically, more than kids. We need to change that, and I'm putting that out there in the universe. Somebody who's listening to this, please, someone who works for legislation, Congress, change that up. Like, I was happy that Kim actually is trying to be a lawyer. I don't know what she's trying to do in regards to trying to change laws, but she has money. And if she could do something in regards to kids, I don't care. Do what you gotta do. Somebody needs to go in there and change things. because we need better laws to protect our kids, and that will help us in turn not feel so traumatic when we see really bad things happen because of colonization and just the way the law works. It's still the law is still colonized in a sense.
Oh, absolutely. It's just with the police brutality and everything that's been happening.
I mean, everything.
And how black and brown people are who populate the prisons, right?
Yes, everything.
We talk about the school to prison pipeline and all of that. Yeah, all of that is intertwined, and I think when I think about it on that scale, I get really overwhelmed, and it's like, it feels hopeless, but it's not hopeless. There are still things that you can do on a smaller scale that will eventually like have a ripple effect on a larger scale.
I completely agree.
And so again, I always try to just start with my mind and decolonizing the way that I think, or if I'm feeling like I'm doing something wrong because I'm not doing it American enough, or like those nuances that come into your thinking and your mind that are not that are just like that you shouldn't feel guilty for trying to be who you are, and you don't need to try to be more white or American.
Yeah, I guess I'm glad that you're talking about that, because I wanted to ask you about the word that you said. You kind of decolonize your mind. Can you kind of like, because that's kind of like what you're talking about right now. Can you kind of explain what that process was for you? Like, how can someone decolonize your mind? What does that mean specifically?
Yeah, I think it started when, again, I was in grad school, and I would hear comments like, I had a friend who asked me once, like, oh, my mom was wondering if you got into this school because of affirmative action. Right, like your response is like, what? Are you for real right now? Is this a conversation? But they were conversations that, because of the population that I was attending school with, like these are the conversations that I ended up having to have. So it just makes your mind like more alert to like where the racism lies and how ingrained in each person's being it actually is.
And just to clarify what you just said, that specific, I'm assuming that specific program is something in regards to like giving you like a free pass, or what is it?
Oh yeah.
Or is it for like a free pass? Is it like
no?
Because
so in
of your economic status, or what is it?
So in the 90s, I think it was the 90s. Like, don't quote me on this, but I think it was in the 90s. The law of affirmative action came into play at schools and universities because they needed more brown people for the diversity laws.
Oh wow! Now I know why you would be upset. You see, I didn't even know that.
So they need like schools have a general quota that they need to meet that are minorities or whatever. So
that's their attempt of trying to decolonize. That's kind of their attempt to try to decolonize. Like, let's throw in some bright people in there.
Like there always used to be a couple of brown people on the cover, brochures and stuff, websites, whatever.
Yes.
And so I would hear comments like that, like, oh yeah, we had a really great trauma speaker come to the university for a conference, and she was doing like large macro level things. Like she was going to places that had been traumatized by like natural disasters, and really like cleaning up after and working through that trauma with trauma survivors. And then the only thing I remember, and this was years ago, so the only thing I remember after I was so touched by like this work that this amazing African American psychologist was like getting in there and doing so much good work, was that my white professor said, yeah, it was really great to have her here. We made sure to have her on every brochure. And I was just like, what?
I would have been like, can you please keep that to yourself? You ruined my, like...
Yeah, so it was just like comments like that.
Now I know why you don't want to distinguish what school it was.
Yeah,
like,
it's just not... it's not...
That's so unfortunate.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, like I said, like, I am very, very hopeful that even if it takes 20, 30 years, things are going to change.
Yeah.
Because the more we speak about it, the more we have conversations like this, hopefully it'll prompt another person has a larger audience to have these conversations. And that's all it takes, is just mimic and do it, and then it just spreads, like how she's saying, like a ripple effect. And I know I don't want to end this in a very like heavy like scenario, but I know one thing that I can give everyone like an example of colonizing a situation is that example of when Los Angeles Dodgers took over that land when there was a bunch of there was a pueblo there, and I know some people know about that incident, some may not. I'm gonna get clips and I'm gonna play it, because I know I have clips where you see, and I'm playing it right now, where you see people getting pulled out of their homes, and it's really sad. This was exposed to me when I was taking my associate's class, and my teacher showed us and he literally educated us about how they did this to our people, and how they forcefully moved them from their homes, and they were left with nothing just so they can build the Dodger Stadium. And I know a friend of mine that her great grandmother, she spoke about it too, and I remember when I heard her talk about it, she was so angry still that occurred to her and her family, and she said she would never step in that stadium ever in her entire life, like ever, and she never did.
Yeah.
You know, God bless her soul.
And
you
I
know,
mean,
it's like,
there's also modern day gentrification, right? So we're seeing that in Boyle Heights, and Echo Park, and Highland Park, Lincoln Heights, El Sereno, like all of those East LA really Latino areas. Those people are currently being displaced, and that's just like modern day colonization, right? And so we just need to be aware of that. And you specifically as like the decolonization of your mind is just questioning that, and also setting the expectation that you don't need to stand for that. And so how do we advocate for ourselves? How do we not further gentrification, right? So just because I'm a good Latino with a profession and like enough money or whatever, I'm not gonna go also gentrify my own community. Like having that level of awareness is really important.
yeah.
Just so that we don't perpetuate that mindset, you know?
Exactly, yeah. Because one thing that we did talk about outside of the camera is making sure that we validate families, especially when we're providing services, and integrating certain interventions and coping skills, or just services in general, to make sure that it intertwines their culture. Mm-hmm. And that's part of not colonizing their therapy or their home setting, or just the way they were raised because of their cultural sense. And as long as it's safe, that's what I always say. As long as it's safe, let people do their culture and intertwine and try to help them to the best of your abilities, so that, you know, or implement that in your own home, like things that I've tried to talk to. So I know my last question for Cristine would be, what would you recommend for someone who wants to do that? I mean, what's something that you want them to know, to be careful, or you know, so that at least they can have the confidence to do it? Because it has to take quite a few people at different schools to do this, to start making some changes.
I think the most personal experience that I've had has been in therapy. So I went to a really great psychologist that I was seeing while I was in grad school, and like I still hold her dear to my heart, and I feel like she helped me a lot. But I realized as time progressed that she saw progress as individualistic. So the more American and the more individualistic I was, the more progress I was having in her eyes. So anytime I brought up, for example, one time I brought up that I felt like my mind had been colonized at the university that I was at, and then she thought that was bizarre and was like kind of dismissive about it. But it was like, yeah, you're white and you have no idea what that experience is like. And then from there, I realized that she really didn't think it was appropriate for me to help support my mom when my mom got really sick. Like, she told me that I was having poor boundaries because I was giving her too much money every month. She told me that I needed to move out of my family's home because I was being too dependent. And where there might have been some truth in those things, I'm not saying that it's completely false. What I'm saying is that you need to find your most authentic self and be genuine with who you are, and protect your culture, and really know like how you're wanting to integrate that. Like, I am Guatemalan and I'm also American, you know, like I was born here and I grew up here, and I go to Guatemala frequently because I still have a lot of family there, and so I want to integrate that culture. I don't want to completely dismiss it and assimilate to American culture. I want to be able to integrate the two and acculturate in a way that feels genuine and authentic to me. And so I would hold on to that and to being your most authentic self in whatever setting that you're in. And so if there's something in your gut that's telling you, I get what you're saying, and at the same time, I need to like search my own intuition to know what is correct here, I would encourage that gut feeling, because I think as a collective whole, like that's what we're needing to be grounded more in, is our intuition and our roots and our ancestors. Like, that's what's going to help pull us out of this.
Yeah, I agree with you. And to end that, I guess I would say is just to don't give up. It's gonna be hard. It's hard. It's everywhere you go, everywhere. And an example I could give you is, you know, I know it's kind of a little odd, but when I watch Shameless, they show how they're colonizing the East Coast. Like, I know that in a way they're kind of advocating in the sense because, you know, in Chicago there's a lot of like people of color over there, and in the show they show how a lot of hipster stuff, a lot of stores, malls, they're just taking over, and it's happening everywhere in different parts of cultures. It's not just us. I think it's just in general with indigenous populations too as well. A lot of us are going through it, and I think also too, just going back to what she was saying about how her therapist was kind of trying to convince her about like the cultural and what she should do. It sounded like she was being pretty biased. That's the thing. That's biases. It's like when you have your own perception of certain things, that person needed to check their biases in a sense, like, oh well, wait, I don't understand because culturally I may not and because she wasn't culturally competent in a sense. And so, you know, it's to me it's a lesson learned, and it helps you kind of also too when you encounter people like that. Like, all right, so it cut off, so I'm really sorry. So what I was saying was that when you encounter people who are showing signs of biased views or just recommending bias just techniques and trying to guide you in a way that you know that it's not really the direction you want to go to, it teaches you how to handle people like that, where you're gonna recognize like, okay, well, the next time I encounter someone like this, maybe I can try a different approach. Maybe I can educate them. Kill them with kindness. Because if for me, I would try at least, but that's just my personality, because I think that I've been in the field long enough that I'm kind of I think I have the confidence to kind of have that conversation, but I don't know how I would respond what response they would give me, because I'm not used to it really having those conversations. But I think like just your passion should kind of push you to have those convos, and if you can't, then like I said, it kind of teaches you how to handle people like that, because there's biases everywhere. I mean everywhere. It just doesn't stop. And maybe teaching them about biases, because a lot of people don't recognize how much our biased views takes over the way we see things, the way we process things, the way we handle certain things, or the way we see other people's situations, because we're thinking about our own biases. And biases is just kind of certain personal experiences that you've gone through that you might think somebody else might have gone through, or you think that just because this helped you, it's gonna help that person. It may not, you know. That's why I always say, like, I can recommend as many things as you can, but it might work for you and it may not. You have to figure out what works for you, and just being open to doing certain things and saying, well, okay, they recommended this, but I don't really feel like it fits my culture, so let me modify it and make it my way. And the professional needs to understand.
Yes.
They need to understand, okay? They need to validate, or at least they need to say like, thank you, or thank you that you tried, and you know, X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. So, and I think it's important to check in with yourself to see where you're at.
Yeah, it is.
In your own experience, to know if you're wanting to educate that person at that time, or if you're just wanting to take care of yourself. I think that's that piece is important, and sometimes we work really hard to educate and propel our own culture forward. But sometimes if you're not up for it, it's also okay to just take care of yourself. Yeah.
Because if you're not okay, then it's going to be difficult for you to even handle any negative responses, or a response that you weren't really looking for. So I really appreciate Cristine for being so open about decolonization and colonization, and I hope that this helped people understand how this is really ingrained for so many like decades and just generations and generations, and how we can hopefully start breaking those patterns with just a little bit of suggestions in her experience and what she went through with trying to decolonize places that she went through her life. Because I'm sure that you know that you probably want to continue to do that if you ever encounter other places. We're like, well, you know, let me give it a try here. I'm not gonna give up. So don't give up. And like I said, I appreciate Cristine for being so honest, because I hope that with these conversations it can motivate other people to have these conversations, and we can start making a change slowly but surely. You know, and just be patient and not lose hope, because I know we tend to feel really hopeless, and I know that feeling a lot, and let's just keep it going, you know. So thank you, Cristine.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Please do not forget to subscribe. Don't forget to like the button. And if you have any questions for Cristine, please, I'm gonna put her handle right here so you guys can reach out to her if you have any questions about what she just spoke about, or her services, or you want to see what she's all about in regards to like her private practices and all that stuff. Reach out to her, please, okay? And hopefully you guys have a nice day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.